These are notes to help you learn what's happening in a cell to give an organism certain characteristics. So if we look at what we've been calling traits, right, characteristics, that could be hair color, that could be eye color, but that could also be the ability to make an eyeball or to make hair, right? That traits don't necessarily just mean like what's different about all of us, but like what are the characteristics that we have. And so now we're really going to learn what's going on in the cell. So there was a guy, a little bit of history, this guy named Gregor Mendel, and he lived in the 1800s in Austria, and he did a lot of the early genetic work around traits. He was really interested in pea plants, so like that make pea pods and stuff like that. He was a gardener. He grew all these different plants, and just like we're doing in class where we're going to be breeding plants with each other and seeing what the results are, he did the same thing, but instead of just looking at one trait, right, the trait we're looking at in class is stem color, he looked at all different traits. And so here's a color of some pea plants, and you can see that there's some variation in the pea flower. And what we see is that some are white and some are purple. So the question becomes, what's going on in these flowers that some become white and some become purple, even though it's the exact same species of flower? These aren't two different flowers. They're the same species, but they're different colors. So the question we're asking is, what's going on in the different flowers that makes them different colors? So to understand what's happening, let's kind of zoom in on a pea plant here, on a pea pod. So if we zoom in, we get closer and closer and closer until we see a bunch of cells. And we've looked at plant cells under the microscope before. We looked at the Elodia leaf earlier this year, and so this shouldn't be anything too new to us. So if we zoom in even more, what we see is we will start to see individual plant cells. And when we're looking at traits and DNA, if you remember, what we want to look at is the DNA that's here in the nucleus. So we talked about that earlier, that the DNA is what's responsible for our traits. And the DNA is found in the nucleus. It's a code inside the nucleus that tells our cells what to do. And it even tells our cells things like, if you remember your organelles, this is a mitochondria here, this is a chloroplast here. It even tells our cells to build mitochondria and chloroplasts. That's a trait. So again, we need to get out of the sense of thinking that a trait is just like, I have brown hair. All of my cells have mitochondria. That's a trait. And so something must be telling my cells to build mitochondria, and that something is the DNA in the nucleus. So again, just to review, because it's been a while since we did cells, if we zoom into a person, we're going to see cells in any cell in the body. They're going to have these different organelles, and here is going to be the nucleus with the DNA. And these squiggly little guys in here are what the DNA is. So all those little squiggles. And we're going to talk a little bit more about vocabulary a little later. And so remember that any cell in your body has a nucleus with all your DNA, meaning all of your DNA, whether it's a trait for building mitochondria or a trait for giving you blonde hair, is found in every single cell in your entire body. So now might be a really good time to pause the video if you haven't done so already, and write down that your DNA is found in your nucleus, and that the same DNA is found in every cell in your body. And going back to the plant, the DNA is found in every cell of the plant's body as well. So you can go ahead and pause if you need to. So now I want to give you some terms, and this is where it's really important that you are pausing the video to write down these new things. So if we zoom into the nucleus even more, so here's the nucleus of a cell, and you can see there are these little X-shaped X-shaped things. And those X-shaped things are actually two large, I shouldn't say little, two large strands of DNA that are connected in the middle. So it's actually one is like that and the other's like that. They're not crossed over like an X. It's like two lines that are meeting in the middle. And those are called chromosomes. So pause the video and write down the word chromosome. And then write down that a chromosome is a long strand of DNA. That's a chromosome. And now we're going to unravel the chromosome a little more. And so here's all the DNA coiled up. And the DNA in each strand, or the total amount of DNA in each of your cells is about 2 meters long. So if you hold your hands out and think about 1 meter and then double that, that's the DNA in every single cell in your body. But you can see how it's all coiled up. And so that's how it's all able to fit inside. Think about it like earbuds, okay? Earbuds are connected to a really long cord. And if you stretch it out, it's pretty long. But if you coil it up nice and neatly, you can get it to fit in a much smaller area. So that's what chromosomes are. They're that nice, neat coiling of all of the DNA so that it can all fit into the nucleus. And then if we go even further, we start to see all the little strands of DNA. And so all these letters here, the A and the T and the G and the C, we've been talking about DNA as colors with the colored dots, but that code is actually made up of chemicals that we call A, T, C, and G. They actually stand for different actual chemicals, but we're not going to worry about those. And so DNA, the shape of DNA, is this nice, what we call a double helix, but it looks kind of like a twisted ladder or a spiral staircase. And so that's all the DNA. So this is the DNA here, and that DNA is coiled nice and tightly into chromosomes, and those chromosomes are found in the nucleus. And then what a gene is, because that's not on here, a gene is a length of DNA. So maybe from here to here would be one gene. Okay, so I'm going to write that in here. So a gene is one length of DNA that codes for a trait. So we often say, like, one gene codes for one thing. And it might be that several chemicals combine for a trait. And so that might be several genes. But a gene is a length of DNA. Some genes are really small. They could be a couple hundred rungs of the ladder. Some genes could be millions of rungs of the ladder. So genes vary in length too. All right. So the big idea is that each chromosome has hundreds or thousands of genes. So going back to our picture, right? Here's one, maybe from here to here, that's another one. Maybe from here, this coil to there is another one. So lots and lots of genes are on each chromosome. And humans have 46 chromosomes. And those 46 chromosomes, 23 of them came from your biological mother. This is supposed to be a little egg here. Here, I'll write that. Egg. Whoops. I don't know what happened there. So 23 came from your biological mother. Here's a little sperm. 23 came from your biological father to make your total of 46. And then if you go on and have children, then you will pass on 23 of those 46 to your son or daughter. Oh, sorry. I forgot that there was this written here. Let me quickly erase what I had written. All right. So a gene then is a code that tells a cell to make a protein. We've talked about different biological molecules. We talked about carbohydrates. We talked about fats. We talked about proteins. Proteins are really what make your traits. Proteins are very, very important. And one gene makes one protein. A trait may be a combination of several proteins. So hair color, for example, is a combination of several genes. Each gene makes one protein, and those proteins combine to make your traits. A bigger gene is the code for a bigger protein. That makes sense. The larger the gene is, the larger the protein is. So you want to pause this and write down these big ideas. Alright, so now let's look at how that happens. So this is inside a cell. And inside a cell, you have a protein. We're going to call that protein enzyme Q. That's just its name. An enzyme is a chemical that helps reactions happen. And we have this colorless molecule. Now this example is going to go back to Mendel's pea flowers that were white and purple. So all the molecules your cell makes, the flower's cell makes, start out colorless. But if your body is making enzyme Q, if your DNA is saying, hey, make enzyme Q, then what happens is that colorless molecule fits into the enzyme, right into the enzyme's little puzzle piece area, and it turns purple and goes out into the cell. And then that enzyme can be used for another molecule. So you get a purple pigment molecule, and that gives the flower a purple color. So you would draw that like this. Here's my enzyme, and I've got a colorless molecule, and it becomes a purple molecule as it goes through the enzyme. And we would call this a functional means working, pigment protein. And so you can go ahead and draw this, and then you can write that the flower would be purple. So let's look at the cells of two different flowers. This is the cell of a purple flower. This is the cell of a white flower. Notice that this is the nucleus. So we're actually going to put some DNA in here, and you can go ahead and draw some DNA as well. And we're going to put on a gene, or we're going to kind of map out a length of gene, and then I'm going to color that in. And I'm coloring it in to show that it's making a functional or working enzyme. And you see all of my enzymes have the little chunk taken out of them, and all of these pieces are going to fit in. Notice there's more colorless molecules than there are enzymes, but that's okay because one enzyme can be reused. So you'll notice all of those turn purple, all of those turn purple, and so we are going to end up with a purple flower. On this one, we still have the DNA. It still has genes, but these genes make a different shape enzyme. And what's different about this one is there's no little notch like this has for our colorless molecules to fit in. So instead, they stay colorless. And what you end up with in this case is a purple flower, where in this case you end up with a white flower. So that gene is making a protein that gives this flower a purple color. This gene is not making that protein, so the flower stays white. Flower color is what we would call a trait, and it's controlled by functional, working, or non-functional, not working proteins. Different protein structures, meaning shapes, equal different protein functions. So if this is a working protein, then it gets purple color. If this shape is not working, then it stays white. So let's review that. So an organism's cells make different proteins. Different proteins are different sizes and shapes. Different proteins do different jobs. They have different functions. And the combination of the function of the proteins determines an organism's trait. So if you have something again, like hair color, then you're going to have several genes. Each gene will make one protein. The shape and function of those proteins will combine together to give you your hair color. And you can do this with any trait. Later next week, we're going to look at, so how does this help us understand why some people can taste PTC paper and some people can't? So now is a good time to go ahead and pause the video once more and write down these big ideas. And then make sure you've answered all of the questions along the way in the Ed puzzle.